Yeah, that's the one that I do have. You want to check?
I told you all the time as I asked.
Okay. John, you also.
Yep.
This one's kind of shady. Okay. First off, it's anxiety tinkering with visa disbursement programs as an attempt to displace a deeper anxiety constantly producing anxious subjects of the border, Salter 287. The system of visa issuance practices, requirements, and rules and regulations regarding the decision of admission, exclusion, constructs, a field in which every traveler must identify and justify themselves, border policing, create securitized subjects, the examination its anxiety and neurotic systems governs itself through the response to the anxiety and uncertainties and is incited to eliminate various stages by calibrating its conduct on the basis of anxieties and insecurities. The figure of the neurotic citizen wants to respond to the anxiety about the other has been articulating itself through various discourses about the border, the pressure to produce a truth further represented in sovereignty, truth which has only been essential to the construction of borders. The affirmative fear of death or bodily destruction represses the deeper existential anxiety by constantly externalizing or finding causes of our discomfort with the world. Park and 2K6. Finding scapegoats for anxiety is much more comfortable than the existential anxiety, direct and unexplainable. These attempts to localize aims, create paranoid fears, and move resistance to have some destructive potential. When it seems just hard enough to make us uncomfortable, we do look for the causes of the trouble. This strides of the conscientious subject to establish an object of fear because fear can be met. Fear of a danger implies an unnerving on the part of a dog with dreadful anxiety. The negative word of the dread of loss of existence has turned into the definite dread of loss of bodily life. Existential anxiety can not only manifest itself as a fear of worldly destruction. Our relationship to death both defines the process of choice and deliberation and the value to life. Subjectivity falls out of this relationship, making each an authentic response a unique refusal to take on the task of making death our own. Davis 89. Death is the origin of subjectivity, not an event that falls at the end of life, but a constantly lived relationship to our eventual non-being. Death informs life because it limits our response to the value of everything that we can know our existence. Only when we comprehend the impossible be the utter extinction. The value of life is moving in ours. Only when we see this hand rushing through our hand. We need to make a uniform response to death as a source of underlying the theme of anxiety. Death blows a cold wind through our desperate attempt to exalt the petty world, which returns to seals and reveals its presence. And an authentic response to death only gives further evidence of its centrality to subjectivity. Like anxiety, death puts us on the move. This attempt to cancel its course serves only to underscore the need for a response that will allow us to take the fact of death upon ourselves and make it our own. In response to the 1AC, we advocate that the judge engage existential anxiety. Essentially, the affirmative concern with escalating war is more than a pragmatic concern. It's an expression of existential anxiety. We ought to refuse politically polemic contestations in favor of an existential realization of anxiety. Swallow 2K2. It issues not whether we do something that feels like everything possession understandable for us or older scholars are concerned about conventional end or when nuclear war. This pragmatic concern is really a manifestation of existential anxiety in the face of death and global catastrophe. It is necessary that this existential anxiety be experienced in an essential way, such that all ethical and political thinking come into question. This putting into question is not nihilistic, such that we come away justifying anything or nothing at all. Rather, the fragility of our inherent and transmitted justifications come to clear belief against the background of the human way to be. Anything has been justified by appeals to universal values and meanings, including the most severe repression, torture, violent cruelty, war, and the enslaving and segregation of groups of people. Universal norms whereby we justify certain values and contending to other values mirrors our fear what the world would be like if we lacked an adequate basis for justifying our values and realizing the best possibilities for ourselves. Next topic, security. Temporary visa regimes are techniques of discipline and control. They make immigrant populations inherently disposable and replaceable. Kathleen Parla in 2K9. The affinity between globalization, territorial principle, and visa policies decides an asymmetric relationship between the sovereign and immigrants and reproduction into the sovereignty utilizes temporariness and legal status of immigrants to ensure a vulnerable and dispensable workforce, assorting people to categories of others that occurs on the basis of their positioning in the economy. The border cross-sector of the included the confessionary representation of bodily, economic, and social information was ensuring that reconfigured by the other state in terms of health, wealth, and labor, leisure, resistance impossible, but structured by the sovereign. These incessant changes repeatedly redefine the threshold of life that distinguishes and separates what is inside from the outside. The affirmative feeds the abhorrence by which security apparatus continuously order and problematize life, producing serial policy failure, only accounting for ontology solves. Dylan and Reed 2KO. Governmentality poses the question of order in terms of management of the population. Policy remains by the problematization of life, turning epistemologically and politically contestable organs of life into problems that require the continuous attention of policymakers. Governmentality creates a market for policy. Reproblematization of it is constrained by ontological and epistemological assumptions. So paralysis precisely what policymakers seek to avoid, since they are compelled constantly to respond to these organizations which do not have the control that they want. Policy failures to assemble shortcomings that policy science will overcome. Serial policy failures were the ontological and epistemological assumption in which global governance problematizes life as a process of emergence through fitness landscapes. Liberal governance is not linear problem solving method committed to the resolution of objective policy problems. It deliberately installs inequitable wealth and danger through the ways in which life is problematized by. Security contributes to the emergence of destructive states of exception that become indistinguishable from the forms of violence that they seek to prevent. And Dominant 2K2. Security imposes itself as a sole criterion of political legitimation. A state which is security sets only a source of legitimacy as a private organs and always turned itself a terroristic. When politics reduces itself to politics, security is a terrorist form, a single deadly system which they mutually justify and legitimate each other's actions. Not for security leads to a worldwide civil war, which destroys all civil coexistence because they need a constant reference to a state of exception. Measures of security work towards growing depoliticization of society. They are irreconcilable with democracy. The defense of democracy demands a change of political paradigms. Visa expansion and reducing restrictions is just another excuse for the consolidation of sovereign authority to decide the exception, expanding the regime of governmentality. Salter 2K7. There is no way of adjudicating the truth lens of the entry that can be described. The bureaucracy's admission to expulsion systemizes the discretionary power. Decision has always already been made. Discretionary sovereign power to admit, exclude, excluding the administrative functions which obscure and align the power of the work of play. The state of exception remains a part of the examination, even if there is policies and rights are relevant to the structure of the representation of the decisions. The interpreted of the claimants is entirely discretionary. Confession comes to play a crucial role, and the documents and narratives must align with the performance of sovereign power. We play the roles of state travelers, which represents ourselves as docile, obedient subjects. Given organizational constraints, order agents must rely on gut feelings. The pieces are based on nerve certificates, which are unconnected to other documents except for the discretion of these issuers. Each document is supported by other documents, all of which situated within the apparatus of the state. Agent identity as discretionary all the way down. You either convince the INS agent or you not. We've come to accept the state of exception when under the board for examination. We forget the price of identity until we are faced with the inspection. Only totally eschewing the logic of security solves neoclass and 2K8. The only way out is to totally eschew the logic of security altogether, so that ideological load in favor of the state that any political thought other than authoritarian should be pressed to give it up. Security has become so all-encompassing and marginalizes all else. The constant prioritizing of security is a political and constitutional rejection of politics. Security politics is an anti-politics dominating political discourse in the same way as the state tries to dominate anything we need to get beyond security, future going security. There's no hole. The mistake has been to think that there's a hole, and this hole needs to be filled with a new vision of security, which is to remap these and reaffirm the state as the trade of politics. The task is not to fill the hole, but to fight for an alternative political language which takes us beyond security, confirming about insecurity and demanding more security, to remind ourselves of the possibility of building alternatives to the authoritarian tendencies and contemporary politics, to situate ourselves against security politics will circumvent the debilitating effects achieved through the constant securitizing of political issues. This requires recognizing security as an illusion. And affirmative visa liberalization is the flip side of oppressive control. It maintains rational governance of population through the mobilization of state-centered affect. View called into 3. The effective dimensions of the government are crucial to the effective regulation of population, cohesion of immigration, and national boundaries. Attention to affect shapes the focus of the analysis. To the governmental logic circulating the public culture through the mediation of immigration and population. The governmentalization of affect is healthy. At the same time, the xenophilic is spectral frame of immigration is a crucial delineation of the governmentality of population and looking for future growth. This tension underlies the oscillation between xenophilic pro-immigration discourses of economic nationalism and xenophobic anti-immigrant cultural nationalism. These articulates play a decisive organization and regulation of immigration policy, particularly in the ways that they are racialized and sexualized. Such xenophilic and xenophobic articulations are mutually informing of facets of economy and policy discourse that seeks to regulate that seeks to select, regulate, and produce the population for the good of the nation. Next obstacle is the act of social protection for migrants is just a part of constant and re-territorialization of social desire, which extends governmentality and the commodity picture, which turns the case out each to get free. The market runs rush over everything, decoding land labor and amenities, turning them into commodities, citing they destroy the social order upon which market depends. Social protection measures are provided, countering the said that it alleviates to some degree the negative impact of the marketing creates the condition by which commodity fiction itself can be reproduced. Social protection measures have extended the realm of governmentality, enabling the coding of the labor of human beings, the commodity to be brought into bonds, sold, reproducing conditions. They create the need for social protection. Liberal states are deterritorialized and re-territorialized societies. They are constituted out of both forces, desires at the core of both these processes and normalize social protection. State practice decide. Role of the ballot is to begin with a change in the way that desire is invested, even when AC may seem revolutionary. Continues the response of social investments of desire. Post when AC desire mindsets do not change us. They are only papered over with a new name and a new regime. Failure to focus on desire of the individual and the repressions of those desires makes the 1AC another ploy for paranoid control to lose and Quadrant 72. The middle investments of the social interfere with the investment of interest and constrain the ability to seek their incentive to press machines. All these are contradictions of all better mass because the state of forces does not prevail over the former state without reviving his residual and subordinated territoriality. The reconscious revolution refers to a new regime of social protection that creates, distributes, and satisfies nuance and interest. The desire is constituted of a social field. Truly revolutionary preconscious interests do not necessarily imply unconscious investment of the same nature, and apparatus of interest never takes the place of a machine of desire. The affirmative social protection of an economically desirable labor of the particular migrant body is just a deterritorialization of labor and the simultaneous re-territorialization of the bodies of the migrant. That turns case because it favors a restriction of difference. E2K3. Illegal immigration is the modern form of nomadism. The desire for order prompts the re-territorialization of nomad space. State desire operates within a social space that has always been inhibited by the schizophrenic desire of capitalism. This intentional oscillation between de and re-territorialization is evident in relation to the desirability of labor and the undesirability of being, which it is attached to the fight of the U.S. border, whose goal is not necessarily to win, but to hide your losses. Illegality, such as illegal immigration, which is actually promoted by and can result of statecraft, results in this type of neo-territoriality. Pauperism was poverty and intensified social danger. Several weapons were used to combat pauperism, which would be considered inclusive, but it also functioned as a polymorphous social instrument, which enabled different players, different members to be played off against each other. And the differentiation between legal and illegal immigration, there seems to be an unspoken acceptance that illegal migrants are not entitled to rights. Differential may be that function is the obstacle to solidarity between native-born workers and immigrants. Immigrants desirable for some reason. Re-territorializing this labor is the illegal immigrant problem is functional in the sense that it separates from illegal immigration and prevents the playing off against each other discussed above. The guest worker programs illustrate the simultaneous participation and deterritorialization of labor as well as recoding while removing territorial boundaries at all the two labor guest worker programs function to distinguish between those labeled guest workers from citizens. Recoding with labor requirements of deterritorialized practices are associated with illegal immigrants and re-territorializations that take place in the larger context of deterritorializations. This provides compensatory the goal of provides compensatory re-territorialization. The goal of immigration policy is not to make our borders impenetrable, but to regulate the flow to affect alienation of labor from its owners. It's smart.
What is existential anxiety?
Existential anxiety is the realization, sort of, that our lives are not or that our lives are finite, like that death is
Okay, well, you
something
make
that
a claim
structures
that
the way
there's
that our
an-
subjectivity is formed.
Sure, but you make
and
a
the way
claim
that
that
we
there's an
relate to life.
anxiety that's repressed by the F. I just want to know what that anxiety is and how you know that we have
Right,
it.
that's what it is. You all isolate an object of fear that can be met. You say, this is what causes death, we can solve this and do that. That masks the fact that death is inevitable and that death is what structures the meaning of our life and informs the way that we come to know our
So the anxiety we're masking essentially is that everyone fundamentally fears death.
That everyone fears death in a way that treats death as sort of an object to be evaded.
How do you know that this psychological explanation that roots so much of human action and so much of human violence in a fear of death is true?
Our Davis evidence is a pretty specific comparison.
No, it's specific, all right. I'll give you that. I want to know how we know he's right.
He compares the concerns that you all consider to be real-world concerns, like those pragmatic
No, but
concerns.
if you accept that model of human behavior, I agree that some of those things might be true, but that's because it's a foregone conclusion if you accept that model that everyone is continuously trying to repress their fear of death. I want to know how you know that's what everyone's doing.
Concerns.
So how do we know that that analysis is correct?
Because the thing that undergirds those pragmatic concerns universally is the expression of the self.
Well, let's talk about these pragmatic concerns. I want to read the part of it that talks about that. World order scholars are concerned with conventional and thermonuclear war. This pragmatic concern is a manifestation of existential anxiety in the face of death and global catastrophe. Does that mean that all attempts to talk about nuclear war are a repression of anxiety?
It's very specific to world order scholars.
It's not specific, dude. I just read the part of it
yeah,
and you highlighted it. I've not seen any of the cards. It says, world order scholars think about nuclear war. This pragmatic thing is a manifestation of anxiety. How do we talk about nuclear war without being part of the system of anxiety?
Engaging in a discussion of how your personal relationship to death effectuates nuclear
I'm sorry. What I mean is how...
Wait, sorry, I need to ask a question. I think I'm missing most of the alternative cards. Can I see them for the security K and the anxiety K and the lose?
It should just be the D&D evidence for Deleuze, and then the Neoclaus evidence for security, and Swassel for anxiety.
Okay. So yeah, I want to know how we scenario plan in a world with the alternative. How do we talk about if we think a nuclear war is coming? Can we do anything besides recognize our existential anxiety in response and hope that something happens?
The criticism is a rejection of those types of scenario planning. Saying that this is the thing.
I'm having trouble. I know you wrote a bunch of cards about why that critique comes first. I don't really understand your vision of the role of the ballot. What social space are we trying to influence with the alternative?
This one?
This one. So how does this one affect what happens in interstate relations that your impacts are talking about? Or in any...
Because our evidence analyzes the way that analysts' discussions of pragmatic concerns affect the way that we come to...
Right, but like those were like the analysts that advised presidents. So
sure, I mean, in the same vein, the plan doesn't happen. It's a question of what political strategy is desirable to engage.
So did you read evidence that your plan spills over? Like that influences people.
Do you want to take a breath in?